Grab a cup of joe and let's gather round that hay bale. With your hosts, Ann from Andale Homestead, Cayce from Ormsby Farms, Monica from Bland's Promised Land Ranch, and Sandi from Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. Here they are. Hey, y'all, hey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ann with Andale Homestead.
Hello, everyone. It is Cayce over at Ormsby Farms.
And I'm Monica at Bland's Promised Land Ranch.
And this is Sandi at Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. And welcome today. And we have such a fun topic, interesting topic. And as all of us are homesteaders, it's just really we're going to dive deep in not just one episode, but 2 episodes. Now, if you're just listening to us and you would like to see our smiling faces, head on over every Monday morning at 9 o'clock Central Time and to Round the Hay Bale, and you can actually watch us besides listening to us. Just another option for you. But we were talking about the cost of running a homestead, part 1. And we are excited about this. And so, Cayce, I'm going to take it to you first. You're the one that just moved, and so we are talking the cost.
I'll tell you, the cost. We were talking off air. We were like, okay, we're talking about cost of running a homestead. Well, a lot. That's my answer. A lot. And one thing I learned from Monica at the very first episode is that, listen, we all have to put money into our homestead, but everything on your homestead is on the payroll, as her and her husband talk about. They're on the payroll, and they have to pay back that money. So when I'm moving somewhere, I'm thinking about building a coop, or I'm thinking about putting in a new garden, I'm thinking, okay, I know there's going to be money going into it. There is money that I'm going to have to invest in this part of my homestead, my business, whatever you want to call it. But how will I make that money back? Because yes, you could do the crafty things, and you can, find wood that nobody's using anymore and barter with somebody to build it. Because let me tell you, Cayce, this one right here, is not a builder at all. It is not one of the many talents that I was blessed with. And using power tools is not something that I was blessed with. So I have to figure out what's going to save my sanity, where I'm not costing my sanity to do something. And I was telling Sandi before we recorded, that for me is buying it new and just having it delivered. You spend a little more money, but long term, I'm not going into a task and taking so long and then despising that task. Like when we moved our chickens, I decided I wanted a small little shed inside of a wired kennel run, and that's what I wanted. And in my mind, I was like, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to save money by buying this cheap shed on Amazon, when really I should have spent a little bit extra, got one that was already made and delivered, because that would have saved me the cost of my sanity more than the cost of my wallet.
Gotcha.
We say that I'm the bougie homesteader. Speaking of sassy, and let's talk to Miss Ann next with her new sassy hairstyle that she's got coming with us to the podcast. And what about you? How do you go into cost of homestead? Because we all have them. It's something.
Sure. Sure. Well, we did build our chicken coop, and I call it the Taj Mahal of chicken coops, because I could probably move in there. My husband's thinking when he was building it, and he's never built something like that before. He's built ships for 50 years, but he never built something structurally. And so he wanted to make sure that if we did get tired of chickens, we could use it as a shed. So that's kind of where he doubled up and got that taken care of. But what we try really hard to do, it is a little disheartening sometimes to purchase your soil, to try to purchase your fertilizer, to get your seeds, have your garden ready, get the ground cover and the poles and all these things. It's just like preparing your home. You can't do that all in one day. You do it a little at a time. Maybe not the first year. Maybe you get a little more the second year and a little more the third year. Because if we were to do it all the first year, then it would have been way out of our budget to get everything. So, what do you think, Monica?
I was just sitting here thinking about what Casey was saying, where, we talked about everything's on the payroll. And, one of the things that Eric talks about all the time is the ROI, the return on investment. And I feel like it's something I have a hard time grasping, right? Because like, how do you explain it? Is there an easy way to explain what it means, return on investment? Sandy, do you have an explanation? Like, how do you explain that to somebody who's new at looking at things? How do you explain what the return on your investment means?
Well, I think you have to break it down a little bit, because your return on your investment, some things that on your homestead will be very quick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you've started this, by the end of the season, say your garden, you are having produce right away. That's
Okay.
your return on your investment for
Okay.
buying those seeds,
Mhm.
things like that. Some other things, cattle, may be several years before their return on your investment.
Okay, that makes sense. So, like for instance, cattle, when you have it, you're looking at it as an investment. We've looked at cattle because it's a longer, I guess, so that would be a longer ROI, right? A longer return
Right.
on investment. So when we look at what you're doing on your homestead, I truly think that part of being an effective homesteader or an effective farmer, whatever you want to call it, when you're looking at that over the grand scheme of things, looking at the total idea of how long of a time you're putting into it and the total return, right? What you're going to get back, what you're putting into it, what your goals are. If you have great goals and you have a good idea of what you want to do with your homestead, maybe you want to grow trees. My sister and my brother-in-law, they're super excited, and they knew 5 years ago they wanted an orchard. They wanted apples and they wanted all these beautiful fruit trees. And one of the things that we did as siblings is they said, look, we're not growing all the vegetables that you're growing in your garden, but we have space and we really want an orchard. So why don't we take care of the fruit trees, and you guys can help with the gardening stuff with the vegetables, and we can swap them out. And so
Right.
that's one of the ways we looked at cost and, how we were going to put that into ours. Now with cattle, with all these other animals, it takes time. Pigs,
Mhm.
it takes time. The return is there, but it's going to take a lot longer for our investment to really give us some meat or whatever it is to pay us back. So I think that's one of the things that we really look at when you're talking about running a homestead and what the cost of it is. If you're talking just about the money portion of it, I think that's one of the things that we look at is how far away is that return on what you've invested into it, right? I guess it's really, I just wanted a good definition because I was scrolling through my phone really quick trying to get a good explanation of ROI, because that's what Eric will say to me all the time. I want to get X, Y, and Z. And he's like, well, what's the return on that investment? What's the ROI on that, Monica? I'm like, I don't know.
Well, if you look at your homestead as like a business, also, they always say that businesses are not going to make their return of interest or their money back for about 5 to 10 years for a business.
Okay.
Any like standard business, most of the time it's about 10 years that you're not really going to see a positive number in that cash back area. And you need to look at the same thing when you're going into animals or gardening. Now, gardening, as Sandy said so beautifully, that's one of them that's pretty quick of a return of interest. And if you're thinking about, okay, Cayce, how is it a return of interest when really you're getting vegetables, you're not getting money. I'm not selling my food. But if you think about, okay, what did I spend in vegetables in an entire year before I gardened? How much did I spend on my grocery bill? Okay. That's how, when I went into chickens, that's what I thought. How much did I spend chicken, like chicken wings, the breasts, all the stuff you buy at the grocery store? How much did I spend in a year? And that's what I invested into what I'm calling my meat bird flock, which was my American breast. Now, I did spend a little bit more money on them because they were expensive. But they are, when we talk about self-sufficiency, you have that upfront cost. So you have the upfront cost of building their coop, their run, purchasing the birds or the eggs. If you're incubating them, you got to think about the time of incubating it, the electricity, whatever it is. But they'll start producing eggs, which then if you have a boy and a girl, I said this on many, many episodes, if you have a boy and a girl, you will continually get chickens that you can hatch out, and slowly over the years, it will pay for the return of interest, as Eric calls it, is going to go to the even balanced one. So you're at like, let's say I spent $250. I'm at negative $250 for my American breast. Each year I want to tick off that to bring that ROI up, to bring it to a zero. Once you're at zero, you're doing pretty good. And if you can get into the positive numbers, you're really doing good. But as I look at it, as long as they're paying for themselves, like the feed, if I'm saving money on chicken to where I don't have to go to the grocery store, they're paying for themselves. They can get, I'll spend that $30 on the feed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Sandi, what about you on that side of stuff? I mean, how do you look at it when you're going into an investment such as animals or gardening or fruit trees?
Well, all of you guys know I'm a lister. I want to see in paper what I think my return is going to be. And there are going to be people here that are listening to our podcast that are already homesteaders. And there are people that are thinking about becoming homesteaders.
Right.
But either way, I think you really have to put your pencil to the paper and have some projections. Think about what I can do right now. Now, it would be wonderful if we were all so wealthy that we could just buy anything we wanted to on a homestead.
Right.
But if you break it down, like on a garden itself, some statistics for you. For each season, for one person, you are probably spending $20 to $50 for the food that you'll produce for one person. Now, if you're not buying starts, you're starting everything yourself, it's probably more towards that 20. So if you had 5 people in your family, you need to think of, okay, my investment in my garden is going to be probably 100 to, depending on what you're buying, to $200-300. Now, what kind of a return on my investment do I make by the end of the season? Now, garden wise, that could include fruit trees, berries, things like that you may not get your return right away. So you have to just figure those things out. But how many of us have just had an overabundance of tomatoes, beans that we have picked and picked and picked? And so for Joe and I probably spend, say, $40 for seeds each year. I'm easily, if I counted the food that I got from my gardens, it's probably $300, $400, $500 worth of food.
Sure.
That is a good return on my investment.
So
Right.
what you're saying is
even
we
with the
should not.
water.
So what you're saying is we should not buy like $150 worth of seeds, leave them in a seed container, and never use all of those seeds. I'm not talking for me.
Of course
I'm
not.
talking to the person out there listening that may
I
have
was gonna say, I'm talking to me because I did my gardener and ain't used my seeds yet. So
I may have just went on Pine Tree and my gardener and spent $40 each. in
Oops.
each one.
They're
And
good
bought seeds.
seeds, though.
But they're good seeds, and I've
Yeah.
used them 3, 4, 5 years after their like
Right.
package date.
Right.
So
Right.
I mean, they can
Yeah,
shrink.
you have to see, because not all of us are like Anna and plant every single tomato seed
Yeah.
from that tomato packet.
Okay.
Just
So-
we're just teasing Ann.
So
Oh, no, that's
smart
fine.
about
That's
what
building.
you buy. That's a good move.
So if you say you bought a packet of tomato seeds and it cost you $4, and you're only using a quarter of those each year,
Right.
then that tomato seed only costed you $1.
Mhm.
But so many communities right now have seed libraries, and you can go and get seed packets for free.
Right.
So look at your regular book library
Yeah.
at your extension offices and see if they have them. Like ours in Wyoming, you can only take 10 packs, but that would have been $40.
That's amazing.
And so if you can get it for
Fabulous.
free, or you're sharing with another gardener,
Mm-hmm.
I was about to say, there's a lot of those seed swaps that go on, especially on
Right.
Instagram and Facebook, and it costs you $7 only for shipping, because we all know shipping
Yeah.
is gone. Woo!
Yeah.
So you're doing $7 for 10 packs of seeds, different cool seeds that you get to try. It's a way to bring your costs down, which would bring your return on investment up.
That's
They
right.
also at the end of the season, I don't know if you guys know this either, but at the end of the season, a lot of times feed stores, Tractor Supply, some of the big box stores actually will go through their seeds. And if they have been packaged a couple years before, like my seed store, my actual local feed store had seeds that had been packaged and they were a couple years old. I think they were like at that 3-year mark, and they get rid of them at that 3-year mark. They're like, well,
Mhm.
or maybe it's a 2-year mark. The germination rate has, increased or decreased significantly. And so they were getting rid of them. So they were selling them for like 10 cents a packet or whatever
Okay.
it was. It was crazy. And so I went in and bought a ton of them. And then I sent them away to people that I knew that needed seeds because
That's
for
awesome.
10 cents a packet, that's amazing.
Right.
For like Sandy was saying, I mean, some of those packets have 50 and more seeds, depending on, even if it's 25 seeds, that's still 10 cents for 25 seeds. So
Yeah.
yeah, at the end of the season, you may be able to find really good deals for the next season.
Right.
That's
Plus, what about saving seeds from what you grew?
Right.
right.
You know,
Yeah.
you have a tomato you love, you have a pepper you love, save those seeds, and you're not having to have another investment of that the
That's
next
right.
year. Saving some bean seeds. Your cucumber gets way too big and it starts to turn all yellow. That's when that cucumber seed is good. You can't save from a green cucumber. It won't germinate. It's
Oh,
not. It has to be an old one that you just left in the garden. It starts to turn yellowish white, and then those seeds are ready.
And let me just say, if you're listening, you're like, oh, Sandy, that's such great information. I need to know more. We actually have a podcast, and you can go and listen to all of Sandy's wonderful information after you're done with this podcast, of course. Go over because we have it on seed saving.
Yeah.
But Sandy, do you, when you plan out, because I will say that me and Sandy are the listers,
Mhm.
and Anne and Monica are the fabulousers.
something like that. I don't know how fabulous they are, but
But I sit down at the beginning of the year, January, sometimes February, and I'm not only am I looking at seeds for my garden, I'm looking at how many cans I went through in the year.
Mhm.
I'm looking at how much chicken I ate throughout the year, how much beef, all of that kind of stuff. I'm sitting down on a spreadsheet and I'm like, okay, what am I investing? It's your eye of the ROI in this year's homestead, which
okay.
may get less and less each year. Do you do that, Sandy? Do you sit down and say, okay, this is the amount of money that I want to invest in my homestead this year, and
Oh,
I need
yeah.
to kind of make it work?
Right, because you want to be fiscally responsible on your homestead.
Mhm.
You know, we can get carried away and we can just want to, we see a video, oh, I want to try that. We see
Yeah.
another video, I want to try that. You can't try all those things. You know, it doesn't work that way. What's your priority? What really would impact your homestead the most?
Right.
Start with that. Then,
That's
if
right.
you have extra, you can go to those other things. But we don't want you to be on a homestead and then you're trying all these things and 2 years later it's like I'm done.
Because it
I
gets too much. It gets too
Right.
much. And I think that's wonderful that you have shared that with people, to not get so far advanced that you said, this stinks and I don't want to do this
Tap
anymore.
out.
This is too
Well,
much work.
And haven't you've said before, I know you've talked to the four of us privately, but like you and Worth, I mean, even though you have a gorgeous garden, it's basically the stuff that y'all eat. It's
It
not,
is.
you
Yeah.
may try one or two fancy dancy things,
I
but
mean, I might have one or two plants that are kind of off the wall that we haven't tried yet, but we do plant the tried and trues because I know how to preserve them. I know what we can do with them. I know that we eat them, those types of things. And one thing you also want to remember as far as the money and more on a homestead, the more is your emotional health, your well-being, to be able to know that, you know what, God worked this out. This little bitty seed grew up to a great big plant. And I know exactly what was on that plant, what was in that soil, to be able to feed my family in the best, most healthy manner. And that really kind of washes out all the rest of the worry. To me, it helps me a lot to know that I'm feeding my family healthy things. As far as the rest of it on fencing and various things, there's all kinds of ways. I mean, Sandy, you were talking about all kinds of different ways. Your chicken coop that you built once last year or a year before, I
A
can't
few
remember,
years ago. Yeah.
2 years ago, was amazing. And you built it out of what?
Pallets, and we had replaced our fence. We had a picket fence before that, and so I saved pickets and I used it for that. So it, actually the only thing that we bought was the metal roof, and we got that in back behind the the store in a tall grass. I said, "Don't you have some scraps of tin, of
Right.
roofing?" And so it didn't hardly cost us anything to build. And so yeah, for me, on a homestead, buildings are gold.
Yes.
When you go to buy a homestead, and if they have outbuildings, you need to think of that as a return on your investment.
Right.
Hmm.
Because if you had to have somebody build that now, you know, even if you have to do some repairs on that building, it's astronomical. Some friends of ours just bought a property. They were looking at two of them, two properties. One had a whole bunch of outbuildings and big barns. The other one had some, but not what he could use for a shop. Pretty much the same price.
Okay.
But for him to get that same building on that other property, $300,000 they wanted to build that.
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
they went with the other property because that building was literally gold.
Yes.
And
Right.
so you have to look at everything on your homestead. I think every single season you need to be walking that homestead. What do I have? What can I use? Because if you can recycle, reuse, or
Yes.
barter with that item,
Hmm.
uh, it's gold. Like,
That's
do
right.
you have to have a tractor? Do you really? How many people
Well,
could
she does.
rent rent a neighbor tractor? Because there's a lot of people that are homesteaders just say, "Hey, I'll give you this much money. Can you do this for me?"
Gotcha.
And in the long run, it helps the other homesteader and it helps you.
Yeah.
So those are
Mhm.
costs to think about.
It
Yeah, it's just
is.
like with bulls and having animals. You having large animals, you don't necessarily need a bull. So you have one less mouth to feed. And when it comes to like cattle, if you are, let's just say you're going to invest in cattle and you want to have so many beef cows to process each year, or you want to have dairy and you want to have a dairy cow, you need to know what's the difference and all the details. But dairy cows eat a lot more. They need higher feed ratios to their, to as more than beef cows. They need better quality hay and things like that in the off season. And you don't need bulls all the time. You can rent a bull. I don't know if you guys know you can rent a bull. You can stud just like a dog. You can have a bull stud. Now, that bull is eating grass and eating hay all year long if you own it.
Mhm.
But if you just rent it for 3 or 4 months, then you
Right.
can pay that short amount of time and then give it back to its owner. And
Mhm.
now you don't have to pay for that bull to eat all that grass for the rest of the year or all the hay. It's one of the things we did for years. We would rent a bull, bring them on the property. And that was the way we were able to get our girls pregnant. It was a lot easier. We didn't have to worry about him running off or doing things that he shouldn't be doing,
Right.
making a mess and breaking things. But yeah, you're right, Sandy. With certain things, you don't have to have it. It's usually a want or I really want this. It'll make my life a little easier.
Yeah.
And we do have a tractor. We didn't actually have a tractor for the first few years we were here. We did everything. We rolled out hay bales. We did all that stuff with just a four-wheeler. We bought a four-wheeler. It was one of the first things we bought besides the cattle and the horse. And that was what we were using to get around. We have my family vehicle, my Suburban that I drove around for a couple years when we got here with four-wheel drive. That's what we pulled a livestock trailer in when we finally were able to, when we had to borrow a livestock trailer from someone.
There you go.
We didn't have one and they were a lot of money.
Mhm.
So we waited, and we were just talking to a friend about this the other day. Like, for instance, a cattle chute. A cattle chute is
Yeah.
huge help, but they're thousands of dollars.
Right.
And we waited and waited and waited. And finally, after about 5 years we were here, we found one. A gentleman was getting rid of one. It was older. We knew we could fix it up and make it look good and usable and workable. And we drove 2 hours, maybe even longer, to go get this, load it up and bring it home just so Eric could put more work into it. but we got it at a really good price. So it's like, really, what are you willing to spend, and how long are you willing to wait before, and balance that out? And I think, a lot of it, what we're saying really goes back to our goal setting in the very beginning of the year, because we talked in our first episode. It was our first episode this year, wasn't it? Oh no, we talked about prepping. We actually talked about the goal setting and things like that. In another episode where we discussed setting goals and not necessarily resolutions, right? Setting goals and having those things for your homestead, for your house. It just makes it a lot more tangible for the year.
Yeah, I think it was the last episode of season 5.
Okay, there you go. But I know we did a whole episode.
That was a great episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, but really for me, if I have it that I can look back onto it, I have it on a paper, or you hook it onto your fridge, whatever makes it easier for you to look at it. And I'm very satisfied when I can check off that goal that I have. And so you're a new homesteader. Start small. You don't I don't know what it is about Americans that we think that we have to have the biggest, the best right now.
Right.
You see young kids and they'll go, well, my parents drive this kind of car. They have this kind of house. They have this much land. Well, it took them a lifetime to get that.
That's right.
And I think we have to look at our homestead. It takes our lifetime to get everything that we want.
That's right.
It's true. My dad said to me when we first got married, he said, Monica, you can't just jump into a 3 or 4 bedroom house. He said, you're young. He said, when you're young, you start off in an apartment, and then you move on and you get a townhome or whatever. And then you can move on to that single family. He said, you don't just come and you don't just get married and jump into a single family. I mean, maybe if you're 35 and you're just getting married, you can jump into a single family. But when you're young, that's the way it used to be, I guess. People got married young and did things and they moved up, and you don't just jump into it. And I think that, unfortunately, this society today has put us in a space where everybody's waited until they're much older to do things. And so they feel like now they're deserved of those big things instead of just starting small and biting off what they can chew.
Right. Well,
and also our last episode was talking about green with envy. And you go into certain things saying, oh, I have to have exactly what Andale has. My house has to look exactly like hers. Really, you need to go into your homestead thinking, what is most convenient and works best for me and my family, and make that beautiful and what somebody aspires to, instead of always trying to have the big, the best, the grandest, the Instagram worthy picture, because you'll save money there if you don't act like Cayce. Sorry, I interrupted you at the beginning.
Yeah, Cayce. Well, I mean, in other words, in starting off, if you want to learn to garden, if you're new to that, or you have a home that you would like to start turning into a homestead and grow your own food. What homestead, to me, you could be a homesteader in an apartment. It's a matter of being more self-sufficient, more creative, more preserving as far as utilizing all of your needs, everything that you have to utilize the needs for your family. But to start off with a couple of 5-gallon buckets, there's no shame in that game as far as getting the knowledge of understanding, okay, this will grow good in that, and this needs that much water, and how am I going to use different things? Do you use kitchen scraps for fertilizer instead of purchasing it, and various ways to plant seeds and things like that, which is exciting to be able to start that. But you don't have to start out with a castle, and you don't have to start out with a Mercedes. You can begin small, gather your knowledge, and learn to utilize that to be more self-sufficient for your family. So what do you think as far as that goes? Sandi, you've been such a plethora of information, of various things, of money, and breaking things down. And I really appreciate that attitude.
Well, I think if you can look at something that you want on your homestead, and you can literally take a piece of paper and break it down. To have a garden, it's just not seeds. You have to look at your soil. How are you going to water it? Do you have to add amendments to your soil? And so you have to look at the different costs of that. How much does it cost you to water your garden? You know,
Right.
uh, can you afford that? Do you have a well, or are you on city water and you have to pay for it? I think if you can just break it down, and in fact, we're going to do part 2 episode on the same topic of the cost of running a homestead. So I hope that we can just dive a little bit deeper into
Good.
all the different areas. And so make sure that you watch part 2 next week. And of course, on Tuesday nights, it is our live, and we talk about the episode that we did on Monday. So then you can come in and ask us questions, and it is a good time. And we learn from you guys in your comments, and hopefully you learn a lot from us too.
There you go. Okay, guys. Bye, y'all. Bye. Are you enjoying the Hay